On the 14th of February, the Commission released its proposal on the CO2 standards for heavy-duty vehicles. And in our statement, we said we have a new chapter here.
As Mrs. Raluca Marian from IRU was saying, it's definitely time for a change. EU institutions are going to set emission standards for buses and trucks, which will deeply change the future scenario. This is huge news in our opinion, in spite of whoever keeps saying that Europe counts only on a small percentage of global transport pollution. Decarbonization needs to start somewhere.
Well, and there is quite so much to talk about the EU incoming ban for diesel or better combustion engine car and van sales after 2035, with the famous and known debate about around e-fuels and biofuels. But what is currently happening in the heavier vehicle segment? Thinking of passenger transportation, the Clean Vehicle Directive has been in place since a couple of years with quotas for zero emission and clean buses in public tenders. And moreover, in February, the EU Commission proposed to make all new city buses zero emission by 2035. So huge challenge for the sector. With a disclaimer, all the efforts, all the grants going towards the technology must not affect the offer of public transport, as Lucy Petersen from WTP makes clear.
We already today have public transport next to walking and cycling as an extremely sustainable mode of transport. And modal shift can really help to contribute to the EU climate targets. So generally, in this whole piece of legislation, we need to make sure that the additional financial burdens that are very clear and that we are expecting do not result in a reduction of the public transport offer overall.
The truck sector has just started its path towards decarbonization. Right now, the EU Commission has proposed a roadmap towards 2040 with the following milestone targets: 45% emissions reduction in 2030 compared to 2019 levels, 65% emission reduction in 2035, up to a final target of 90% emissions reduction by 2040. To reach these targets, cleaner vehicles need to be available, and manufacturers are really working on it. But widespread infrastructures for BEVs, FCEVs, and other zero-emission vehicles is also crucial. That's why at the end of March, EU institutions reached a deal on the alternative fuels infrastructure regulations, implying accurate targets for charging or refueling stations along the main European corridors and in suburban areas.
But if you think it's getting quite complicated, just wait another minute. In July 2027, the Euro 7 emission standard for truck and bus, for diesel truck and buses, is scheduled to come into force. And this implies remarkable, huge investments in the technologies to make internal combustion engines cleaner. The CEO of a primary truck and bus group recently stated that this Euro 7 standard is quite a nonsense idea. Yes, it is not easy to surf into all this regulatory sea. That's why Sustainable Bus and Sustainable Truck and Van joined forces with some key players of the value chain, from organizations to operators and OEMs, of course, with the idea of outlining the incoming scenarios of heavy-duty transportation.
Starting with the contribution from the International Road Transport Union, IRU, an association that celebrates this year its 75th anniversary and counts members in over 100 countries. We picked a couple of sentences from IRU EU Advocacy Director Raluca Marian's official statement released last February, right after the EU Commission proposal on CO2 rules for heavy vehicles. So she said, commercial heavy-duty transport is a different story to cars, and also the EU cannot afford experiments here. Is there a risk that the legislator might not fully consider the peculiarities of a complex sector such as heavy commercial transport?
We are at a historical moment for the future of our sector, because what we are discussing now is the future of the combustion engine. The difficulty in which we are at the moment is that we mainly know only combustion engine at the moment. So there are 7 million heavy-duty vehicles on the EU roads, and 98% of them are combustion vehicles, perhaps even 99%. Then there are some gas, and the vast majority, 96% diesel. So this is what we know, this is what we have used for decades. Now, our sector has to change. We have to become cleaner, we have to decarbonize, and obviously we are committed to this. However, we would like to see decarbonization in its essence. And decarbonization in its essence is not only about the vehicle as such, it's about becoming carbon neutral in general. So starting from that, why does it matter how we become carbon neutral? If it's just the vehicle which produces zero and everything coming into the vehicle is renewable, that's a good way forward. I'm talking here about the electric battery and hydrogen fuel cell. If we have carbon neutral fuels, which in the, or e-fuels as they are called now, which in the production process absorb CO2 and in the vehicle they emanate CO2 whilst being burned. When we talk heavy duty vehicles, we have to understand that we talk from 7.5 tons to 80 tons. So all are heavy duty vehicles. Whilst for the smaller range, you can imagine, and we already have on the streets a variety of technologies. When we go to the heavier, the higher end of the heavy duty vehicles, 40 tons and on, it becomes quite problematic with the current technology to even consider a lot of options. And we just sent a letter to all the EU commissioners just before the Commission's publication. And in that letter, we gave the example of how much power a truck needs to, an electric truck needs to be charged. A truck, a 40-ton truck, which is the standard heavy-duty truck, requires the power necessary for 120 to 140 households. And we also have a different story because we fulfill completely different functions in the economy. We move the economy. With all due respect for cars and for people's well-being, we are not leisure. Commercial transport is a necessity. Logistics move the economy, and mobility of people, we move people in a sustainable way, even if we don't look at the types of vehicles and what we use to move those vehicles. Just to speak about the proposal as such, so the actual proposal of the Commission, we were happy to see that the initial intention of the Commission to set the end of the combustion engine in 2040 is not there. So it was a happy outcome for us, because the starting point in the discussion for heavy-duty vehicles is different due to this proposal from the starting point for cars and vans. We have 90% 2040. This means it's not the end. In the proposal, it's not the end. Now, is 90% okay? Well, that's a question mark for us, because basically it's only 10% remaining for combustion. I don't mean here hydrogen combustion, because hydrogen combustion is included in the zero emission. Combustion of anything else. So could be carbon neutral fuels, could be anything. So let us assume there will be carbon neutral fuel so that we reach the carbon neutrality, but it's only 10% remaining for that. So one big question mark we have, and we have to discuss with the politicians and with the fuels industry and also with the manufacturers, if the 10% makes sense. Because 10% may mean zero. It may mean zero because there may be no incentive for manufacturers to keep investing and produce these vehicles for such a niche and it may be no incentive for fuel producers to invest in fuels for such a small market share, let's say. But we understand that one of the EU big concerns for having a larger market for carbon neutral fuels, an argument which is often offered to us, is that there won't be enough. There won't be enough e-fuels for everybody, and that there are captive sectors having no alternative. And these captive sectors are aviation and maritime. Now, in our letter before the CO2 proposal, we have also captured the point of view of the fuels industry, because it's them to say if this makes sense or not. We are the users. We are happy to have options, and we call for options. But what do the fuels producers say? The fuels producers say that there is enough. They tell us there is enough. They even tell us that it doesn't make sense for them to produce only for aviation and maritime. Because aviation, for example, it's a very specific type of fuel that requires, and there will for sure be some byproducts, and they would need a market for that. So for them, road is a perfect market to sell these products remaining from their activity with the aviation. So obviously we hear from the fuels producers, there is enough. So then what is the problem to decrease the 90% to a lower percent?
Also, thinking of long-haul transportation, what's the IRU's opinion on the AFIR law as remarked by the European Union not long ago?
Now, looking at what came out, because this is what we were calling for, having this network and a good network in place in due course, as proposed by the Commission. So 2025 would have been ideal because they are coming, these vehicles. And for hydrogen, we were requesting 2027. What we see now in the compromise, let's say in the deal which was struck this week, is the best of all the possible worlds, let's say. The best in the sense that a better outcome with the member states concerned regarding their budgets and their investment is very difficult to reach. We had a very ambitious parliament, a very good rapporteur who really fought and battled for everything. And better than that, we can't get. So we are happy with it, but it's not ideal. For us, the signal is that actually we can't massively invest and plan electric vehicles before 2030, because the 100% infrastructure is as of 2030, and the same for the hydrogen, which is a pity and a missed opportunity, because with 15% in 2025, what does it mean 15%? Will we use these trucks only 15% of the road? And what does it mean 15%? So that's why we are looking at 2030, where we have 100%. So that's a little bit our thinking. And then there is an unsolved part of the equation. And again, all in all, we are happy. At least there is a commitment from member states to invest in a part of the infrastructure. We hope that private investment will happen as well. And all in all, we'll have a full network. So let us stay optimistic. But there is an unsolved part of the equation, which is not even addressed in the alternative fuel infrastructure, and that's the grid. When the logistics invest in these vehicles, they must have the guarantee that the operation is continuous. We can't take a truck and then it just stops on the road because there is no power in the grid. What will happen with the logistics chain? Where is this guarantee? And that's not enough here. So we are looking forward to see more guarantees apart from the charging, which is a good start. The second part of the equation, which is the grid.
Public transport operators and agencies, it is needless to say, are heavily impacted by the new proposal, mostly from the part that proposed the ban of new diesel buses in cities since 2030. It is nice to have here featuring also WTP, the global organization of public transport, with the already appeared Lucy Peterson, which is a senior policy expert at the European Department of the organization. She will drive us into the ways UTP members have welcomed such proposal, with a spoiler, quite mixed reactions.
So for some members, I would call this a non-issue. Several European cities, as I think many are aware, have already committed to only procure zero-emission buses in the future, whether that be from now on, from 2027, 2030 onwards. So that's a political decision. For those members, it's less of a problem. For many others, this new legislation is mainly an issue of financing. There's quite a lot of operators and authorities that are very keen to go for zero-emission buses, largely electric buses, and they lack the financial means to go fully zero-emission from 2030 onwards. That's mainly due to the very high upfront costs, both for the buses themselves and for the infrastructure. Our sector, as many may know, has quite long investment cycles. So this legislation forces many of our members to completely restructure their investment plans for the upcoming years. And many operators on top of that, especially in France, in the Nordic countries, in Spain, have heavily invested into biofuels, notably biomethane. And this was possible under the previous or the current legislative framework, the Clean Vehicles Directive, which set procurement targets for clean and zero-emission buses between 2021 and 2030. So under this new Commission proposal, they would not be able to amortize their investments in gas refueling infrastructure. Specifically for municipal utility companies, this is an issue because some of them produce biomethane in their waste treatment plants and then use them in transport. So they have a sort of circular approach on the matter, and this would jeopardize their current plans. We currently, due to all these circumstances, don't see the 2030 target of 100% as feasible for the entire sector, and do think that there needs to be an additional delay. In terms of bus procurement, let's be very honest, 2030 is basically tomorrow.
And within this roadmap, there is also an issue on the definitions.
Another point that mostly all of our members agree on is the definition of an urban bus. And I think this is an interesting point to consider. In the Clean Vehicles Directive, we were solely looking at Class 1 and Class A. So these are the types of vehicles that the public transport operators and authorities have been looking to decarbonize the most quick. And now with the new Commission proposal, they also include Class 2 buses with lower entry in this definition. So we think this should be aligned with the Clean Vehicles Directive to make sure that the easiest to decarbonize are the ones that go first.
And finally, let's come to the conditions that could make this 2030 100% zero-emission bus sales achievable, or at least a little bit closer.
First and foremost, policymakers really need to create the enabling conditions, and that largely boils down to sufficient funding and financing. And that's not only for buses, but also for their charging or refueling infrastructure. Since clean bus deployment is the transformation of the bus depots, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. You need the people that are actually able to do it, and you need to retrain your staff to work, for example, with electric or hydrogen buses. So big challenge there. And currently the funding landscape in Europe varies significantly between the member states. And overall, it's insufficient to allow only zero-emission buses to be procured from 2030 onwards. The demand for zero-emission buses is very clear, and a lot of operators are quite keen to go for them. There's a lot of benefits, such as local air quality. Citizens generally appreciate them. But even in countries where we have substantial funding programs, these are heavily oversubscribed. So we really see that there needs to be a step up in terms of financial commitments, both from the EU and from the member states.
More than once we mentioned truck and bus manufacturers as key actors in such a changing scenario. ACEA, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, or rather the voice of the auto industry, truly represent them. Thomas Fabian is Director Commercial Vehicles within ACEA. We want to be practical with him by asking first of all which volumes we might expect concerning new commercial vehicles drivelines by 2030 in order to fulfill the proposed regulation.
I'm happy to share our industry's views here on the decarbonization of the European policy framework. And to get right to your question, the new regulation that has been proposed by the European Commission for the CO2 standards, emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles, The new target there is a proposal of a minus 45% reduction target compared to a 2019-2020 baseline. And this one actually essentially doubles the annual reduction rate compared to the current target that is in place today. Achieving this minus 45% reduction target would essentially require more than 400,000 zero-emission vehicles to be in operation within about 6.5 years or so, and close to 100,000 to be registered annually from 2030 onwards. And this means that more than 1/3 of all new registrations would have to be zero-emission vehicles from 2030. Now, our point here is that in order to be able to operate these vehicles, this fleet would require over 50,000 publicly accessible, suitable charging stations, out of which about 35,000 would have to be high-performance chargers, that means megawatt chargers. And in addition to this, some 700 hydrogen refueling stations that would also be required. Today, we have close to no truck-suitable charging available, which means that today, even the current CO2 reduction target that is in force already, minus 30% for 2030, is out of reach. And unless we see a massive acceleration of the rollout of infrastructure, and in addition to this, decisive action to establish a comprehensive carbon pricing system in road transport, vehicle manufacturers and ultimately the whole road transport sector will not be able to reach these figures.
Mr. Fabian, one topic is really gaining attention, the Euro 7 standards. Can you tell us some more about this?
With respect to Euro 7, we think that the Euro 7, we really think that there needs to be very close coordination between the CO2 regulation and the recent Euro 7 proposals for heavy-duty vehicles with regard to content, timeline, and implementation date. We think that the Euro 7 regulation for heavy-duty vehicles has actually been justified with unrealistically low assumptions about the required market uptake of zero-emission vehicles. The assumptions that have been used in the so-called impact assessment for Euro 7 would not even allow manufacturers to achieve the existing CO2 reduction targets and would essentially lead to massive penalties that would have to be paid by manufacturers. Therefore, we think that the assumptions for the Euro 7 regulation should be reassessed and be aligned with the CO2 regulation, and that the proposed stringency level of the Euro 7 exhaust emissions should be revised to a level which does not distort the huge efforts that we will have to make and the investments that are ongoing in the context of decarbonization.
And also, what about the importance of implementing grid and infrastructure in order to allow zero-emission vehicles to be deployed?
Negotiations on the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation have just been concluded, and member states will be required to ensure that a certain level of charging and refueling infrastructures become available until and by 2030. AFIR only mandates about a quarter of what will actually be needed. So the respective industry sectors, those that are providing and operating chargers and hydrogen refueling stations, will have to step up and close the gap. There is an infrastructure gap that will remain under AFIR. And we're also beginning to hear that planning and permission on the local and regional level takes time, many months, if not years. The discussion about electricity grids and the network connections is only beginning. This will also have to be accelerated quickly. And lastly, it seems that finding suitable locations for truck charging is difficult and time-consuming as well. So part of the big picture of decarbonizing road transport is that it is not at all about only the European level, but that there are many, many issues that need to be tackled on the regional and local level. And we think that the state of the enabling conditions, namely the infrastructure, but also carbon pricing measures, should be reviewed, very closely monitored and reviewed on a very regular basis. That means annually. And if at any point in time, crucial elements of those enablers are not in line with what is required on the CO2 target side from vehicle manufacturers, those targets should be reviewed, and ultimately non-compliance penalties for manufacturers must be reconsidered and potentially even waived. So we as vehicle manufacturers must not be held accountable should others, policymakers or industry sectors fail or simply not be able to deliver their parts to decarbonize heavy-duty road transport.
What's the impact of the deep changes we've been talking so far on the major European cities? There is no one better than C40 to tackle this topic, as it is a global network of around 100 mayors around the world working to achieve ambitious climate initiatives in their cities. We've got Zero Emission Freight Program Manager Catherine Itner with us, outlining how goods may be moved and delivered in a more sustainable way.
On the transport side, we are working toward a people-centered vision. So I mention this because when it comes to freight, of course, electric trucks and vans are critical, but it's not just about one-to-one vehicle electrification, because we're really trying to help our cities create great places for people to live and work. So, places where there's a higher quality of life and less congestion. And this requires new approaches and new ways of moving goods around the city. So what are the biggest barriers that cities are facing at the moment around urban freight? There are a lot. I'm just going to highlight 3 right now. So the first is lack of data and insights into how urban freight operates. Freight is a very diverse and segmented sector. A lot of cities across Europe don't know how many freight vehicles are on their roads or what types or how they move through the city. And this can make it difficult to determine the best way to accelerate the transition to zero emissions. The second barrier is around charging infrastructure for heavier vehicles. A lot of companies are trying to build their own charging for their fleets, but are facing decades-old city regulations and processes. And then I think there's also still some confusion around whether public commercial charging is needed and how that would be operated fairly and effectively, as well as some confusion around what is the best role the city can play in facilitating the building of charging for commercial vehicles. So, and the third barrier that I'll mention is the high upfront cost of electric trucks and vans. Costs are coming down. We've seen reports that electric trucks will actually be cheaper to operate than diesel ones in about 10 years' time. But for the time being, they're still more expensive, and this remains a big obstacle, especially for small businesses. So looking across these 3 barriers that I've mentioned, I think one of the most important factors for decarbonizing freight is that cities can't do it on their own. They need private sector stakeholders and logistics experts to help understand how freight operates and what the impacts of different policies and approaches would be. They need companies to share data where possible. They need policies and regulations at national and EU levels to help bring down the cost of technology. This is where the CO2 standards come in and are so important. They also need financial institutions offering new tools that can make it easier for cities to deliver solutions on the ground. So, this is not a new idea, but I think for freight, it's so critical. Collaboration really is key. And on charging infrastructure specifically, working with businesses through feedback and collaboration channels can help identify the pain points and the processes so that cities can then figure out how to speed things up and make it easier. So this might be through, reviewing and streamlining permitting processes, could be working with local utilities to ensure grid capacity. But yeah, figuring out what those sticking points are so that cities can help address them.
Mrs. Itner, could you please mention some best practices and also major trends or remarkable experiences you've been seeing so far?
But I'm going to highlight 4 important trends that we're seeing. The first one is around zero emission areas and low emission zones, then procurement, e-cargo bikes and micro hubs, and finally, city business collaboration. So starting with zero emission areas, we see these as a really key mobilizing force. These zones are a way that cities can help incentivize investing in zero emission technology and create a more even playing field with fossil fuel vehicles. Zero emission areas can communicate a long-term vision. They do need to be announced with enough lead up time so that businesses can prepare. But knowing that these areas are coming into play can also provide security to private sector stakeholders on investments. The second trend is around procurement. Cities are using their purchasing power to provide advantages for zero emission technology. So for example, Oslo recently prioritized zero emission technology for city deliveries, so any deliveries that are being made on behalf of the city. Barcelona also recently stipulated the use of zero emission vehicles for any city cleaning and waste collection services. The third trend is around e-cargo bikes and micro hubs. So I think this is an exciting new approach. It's really been taking off across Europe. I think I've seen over the past few years, many more cargo bikes in London where I live. And I think from an air pollution perspective, switching from vans to cargo bikes where people live can have huge health benefits, especially since truck tires and brakes are a big source of particulate matter pollution. Sometimes e-cargo bikes are coupled with micro hubs. So this would be, where a van or truck brings goods to a hub in the city center, and then the last mile of the delivery is completed by e-cargo bike. And we've actually been working on a pilot project with the city of Milan, which ran for a few months last year in the city center, finding really promising results of lower costs and time by using e-cargo bikes, and of course, significantly lower carbon emissions.
The environmental organization Transport and Environment aims to play a role in pushing a real revolution in the way transport is actually powered. Freight manager Fedor Unterlöhner tells us more about their position on the recent EU proposal for CO2 emission standards.
For us, actually, it's one of the key legislative pieces of the European Green Deal. Trucks and buses make up 28% of road transport emissions in Europe, while only representing 2% of the vehicles. And these emissions are continuing to grow without further action. So when the Commission proposal brought forward a minus 90% CO2 reduction target in 2040, this might seem actually close enough to decarbonization at first, but as we see it, due to a number of shortcomings, this proposal would actually only reduce overall heavy-duty vehicle emissions until 2050 by around 56%. So we are nowhere near where we actually need to go by mid-century. So what we're actually saying, and what we have been saying before, is that first of all, a 100% target is needed. And ideally, this should be set already in 2035 for freight trucks, buses, and coaches as per the scope of the regulation. If we did that, and also if we included vocational and non-certified trucks that are currently out of scope, we would actually be able to reduce the sector's greenhouse gas emissions by more than 90% by 2050. What we're also seeing with great concern is the 2030 target that was set. So the Commission proposed to increase the current 2030 target of 30% to minus 45%. But if we're actually looking at what the truck manufacturer industry is already planning, we are seeing that based on their announcements, they are aiming to sell around 50% of their sales as zero emission trucks in 2030. If we translate that into a CO2 target, then this would be well over 60% CO2 reduction in 2030. So we actually really believe that what the industry is saying should be the benchmark for the regulation, and the regulation should also aim for something that is slightly higher than that. Another shortcoming that we have identified and that we have an issue with is that the proposed regulation actually excludes quite a large share of trucks. So according to our calculations, around 20% of the total heavy-duty vehicle sales in Europe. That is vocational trucks, but also small trucks up to 5 tons, certain trucks with special axle combinations, but essentially just also trucks that are driving in our cities every day. So these are delivery trucks, garbage trucks, construction trucks. These are actually completely exempt from the regulation and not regulated at all. So what we are saying is that for these also targets should be set, and they should also go fully zero emission by 2040 at the latest. What we have also identified is the changes to the definition of what counts as a zero emission vehicle. So based on the current regulation, a zero emission vehicle, either a truck or a bus, is defined as a either fully electric, battery electric vehicle, a fuel cell electric vehicle running on hydrogen, but also hydrogen combustion trucks that are running exclusively on hydrogen. We believe for the heavy duty vehicle segment, that is okay. They can run exclusively on hydrogen since this is a zero carbon fuel. But the Commission has now proposed to change this definition and has significantly watered it down. So what it now also includes is hydrogen dual fuel combustion engines that are running partially on diesel. And these would also qualify as zero emission vehicles. So what that means in detail is actually that a 40-ton truck in Europe could run on up to 10% of its fuel as fossil diesel and still count as a zero emission vehicle and 0 gram under the regulation. Now, maybe just to round up on this, what we're actually really seeing is that the European industry is headed for zero emissions. But what we are lacking is the investment certainty to actually make that happen as fast as possible. So we're actually seeing a lot of movement on the industry side, on the governmental side. We have, for example, 10 European countries that have already pledged to transition to 100% zero emission heavy duty vehicle sales by 2040. And we have also non-European countries such as the UK, Norway, but also Canada and the United States that have pledged and that are going into this direction. So this is not really anymore only about climate action policy. This is just as much also about industrial policy, employment policy, and trying to make sure that the current leadership that we have in this industry, in the commercial vehicle industry, will actually also stay in Europe, and the new technology will be developed and manufactured and sold here in Europe.
Hydrogen will be one of the actors when it comes to the transition in the city bus segment. We have here Safra, a French OEM, here represented by the president Vincent Lemarie. Safra is also a partner of this initiative. So let's get a glimpse about which are the OEM strategies at the moment on the Class 1 bus sector.
These days, there is 2 ways to electrify a city bus fleet with battery electric vehicles or with hydrogen vehicle. And in fact, it's a very good. It's not so difficult to electrify to install an hydrogen technology. You need less infrastructure, less charging infrastructures with the hydrogen technology. With subsidies, it's not so expensive on a capex point of view, because, for example, in France now it's less expensive to buy an hydrogen vehicles and battery electric vehicles, and it's very easy to operate because you need only a few minutes to refuel the vehicle. So, of course, if we want to massify all the, and we will succeed to massify all the fleets, it's a real necessity for citizens. We will see more and more hydrogen vehicle in our cities. And of course, if I'm speaking about the intercity segment, there is no way to do a full day of service. It's about 400, 500 kilometers a day with battery electric vehicles. It will not be possible in the future. So the hydrogen technology is very, very efficient for that kind of vehicle. And anymore, it's also a question of sovereignty. of course, with the hydrogen technology, we're able to find all suppliers all over Europe with fuel cell suppliers like Symbio, Plasticomium in France, Bosch, etc. It is now available, and I think that's important for public transport authorities to see also that point. It was there is so much money all over Europe now on this technology on a European point of view, but also in many national policies to manage this new development. In France, it's only 30 vehicles, 23 from the Safra products. So we're very proud of this. With an hydrogen vehicle, I'm sure that we're able to do the same operations than with a diesel vehicle. I'm not sure it's possible with battery electric vehicles. You know, I heard about a growth of the fleet about 20%, 30%. It's not so easy in a city. You need a bigger, larger depot, larger fleet. And when you compare the all TCO analysis, it's not very common to take into account this growth of fleet. So tomorrow, an hydrogen vehicle, and even today, are able to do the same operation than a diesel vehicle. And that's a real difference.
But as also WTP mentioned before, also the class 2, the intercity bus sector is affected by the decarbonization. So how is Safra dealing with it, and which is the role that even retrofit can play in this regard?
To go on this market, we choose to enter on this market by the retrofit approach, which is very interesting on an expenses point of view. You know, there's a lot of thermic vehicles now with an average which would be a 7 years old vehicle, which are very good vehicle, but it's thermic vehicles. It's with the diesel engine. So it's a very good idea to take that kind of vehicle and to switch the technology, to install a hydrogen pack. And we have this kind of this kit now available on the market. We're able to transform a bestseller in Europe with the Inturo model from Mercedes. And we're able to switch it in a very short time, in 2 weeks of work, to do that kind of retrofit, which is very interesting also to accelerate the electrification and the hydrogenization of this fleet. We are now working on the first order with 15 vehicles very soon on the road. We are at the end of the process of the homologation, the certification process, which is very new all over Europe. It's not fully homogenized between in each country, but now in France it's possible by the law, and we have to do it with a full process, including safety, including all the like on the new vehicle. You know, it's very important that a retrofitted vehicle we have the same level of safety than a new vehicle. And yes, we will be ready in a few weeks now on the road with a retrofit vehicle, which will be less expensive than a new one. It doesn't exist at this day on the market, a new intercity hydrogen vehicle. So with an hydrogen vehicle, it will be available for the half price of a new vehicle. We are working to be able to do several hundreds of vehicles a year on that way. It will be easy to accelerate with that kind of transformation.
Quantron can be considered as a newcomer, quite a special one, as either buses and trucks are in the German company's portfolio. BEV or FCEV, zero emissions anyway. We've got with us Global Sales Director Utz Rachner, talking about the impact of EU emissions reduction regulation on the development of Quantron vehicles. The question is, are the latest proposals encouraging your medium to long-term strategies?
Absolutely. To be very frank with you, the latest EU Commission reduction regulations fully support our strategical goal for emission-free commercial vehicle businesses, which our owner and our top management have already foreseen in the last years when they started to establish Quantron AG. As you know, Quantron AG is now a little bit more than 3 years old, and that was one of the motivations that our founder has identified and has had the vision that this kind of direction will take place. The regulation itself fully supports our strategic to provide battery electric and fuel cell products on the light duty, heavy duty, and as well as in the bus segments, as we have it already available. But even more, from my point of view, it proves that our strategical concept of hassle-free pay-per-use, what we call Quantron as a service, has a very high likelihood to become even industrial standard in the next years to come.
Talking about hydrogen trucks and buses, what's the technological roadmap you have in mind? How is it crossing the latest EU proposal on hydrogen-related mobility and infrastructure?
We believe that both technologies are needed. We have formulated a kind of white paper where we have further analyzed what the industry will need in order to get CO2 emission-free driving in the years to come. And in particular, when we are looking at the ambitious plans of the European Commission to substantially reduce over the next 10-15 years, basically nearly to zero, it gives us a clear indication that we cannot live with only one product or with one technology. So therefore, we at Quantron, we are working technology independent, or we are not choosing one. We have both at the moment available. So that means we are further looking into how does the infrastructure of our clients look like, what are the energy availabilities, what is the fleet size, and what's the topographic the customer is currently working on. Because based on all these kind of circumstances, the decision what is the best option for him can change. To give you a practical example, when we talk about a battery electric commercial vehicle, whether this is light or heavy or even buses, very quickly when they are returning in the depot in the evening, and suddenly you have like 50 trucks to be fully loaded, to be ready to do the work on the next on the next day, you can easily imagine how much energy would be required to get the battery loaded. So from that point of view, when you are just looking at the fleet size, it becomes very obvious you have to think in a slightly different way. And the same is relative to the topic that either you have a very hilly circumstances, then the work the vehicle has to be made is substantially different than let's say on a fully flat area where you quickly can return and recharge. So from that point of view, it depends very, very much on the client. It depends on his circumstances, and therefore we cannot decide we go for one side of it. We also believe that the industry itself will move and have to move in that direction, because by all means, either you have too many batteries and you lose payload, which is not what our customers are looking for, or you have to work then even on the different product concept itself. So in other words, we are technology open. We are offering our clients both options, and in this regard, it is absolutely relevant for us. When we talk about the charging infrastructure or the loading infrastructure, then definitely when it comes to hydrogen, this is a very specific topic we have to look at.
Technology is one of the topic, and business model economics is one of the other big issues. We have here, switching from vehicle manufacturer to operators, Bruno Lapéry, which is Director, Center of Excellence, Energy Transition Bus in Keolis, a global public transport operator. How the roadmap for energy transition is going to have an impact on the business model of public transport. We think this is a really core topic.
The impact of this new business model is major. We used to have 1/3 capex and 2/3 opex for diesel, and this is the contrary for electric. And this has many consequences. The first one, very obvious, is that the more you drive the electric bus compared to diesel, the less expensive you are. The second consequence is that if you find a way to extend the lifetime and the amortization of the vehicle, this is very powerful, and very quickly, even if you extend it a little bit, very quickly you will become less expensive for electric than for diesel. The third consequence is that the issue and the big problem of the residual value risk at the end of the contract as an operator is becoming more and more important. And at least, of course, as a private operator, the need for financing is becoming more and more problematic. This development is a real wind of change, and that is changing very deeply all the aspects of the business. Planning and operation is different. Maintenance, of course, is different. Skills and training, and even the economic model. And the three major topics I would like to highlight are the first one, that the autonomy of the electric bus is still a bit more than just the half of the one we know for diesel. And that's changed everything for planning and operating, of course. The capex intensity that has been timed by 2 in just a few years, and the total cost of ownership of the e-bus that is still higher by 25 or 30%. And the third new one is the volatility of the energy price that we know today everywhere in Europe, especially electricity price, that lead us to find a different way to stabilize it.
Well, but also relations between operator and PTAs and operator and manufacturers are kind of changing within this roadmap. And new topics such as data and battery management have become paramount. They require new skills, new competences, and new frameworks even.
Because everything is moving so fast regarding the relation between the PTO and the OEM, this has to be more than ever a mix of trust and precaution. Frankly speaking, we have big issues on the table with manufacturers. Like, for example, the data, and especially the data generated by the battery, which is 1/3 of the value of the asset. How to collect it? Who is the owner? How to store it? What for? We have a big pressure to start operation with zero emission vehicles in our contract and with in our relation with PTA. And very frequently, it's very difficult for the manufacturer to be reliable and to be on time to deliver the vehicles. The good news is that if we knew some real issues on reliability of the vehicles in the first years, now it's not anymore the case. We have a very good reliability of the technologies on the market.
Switching once again from buses to trucks, Andrea Condotta is Senior Manager Public Affairs, Innovation and Sustainability at Gruber Logistics, a primary logistics group counting on over 2,300 trucks to deliver goods nearly all over Europe. Firstly, let's get to know how Gruber Logistics is making its fleet more sustainable, relying on what technologies?
I would say in general, for the decarbonization, we act in 3 pillars. The switching towards modes of transport which are less polluting, such as rail or ship. The second pillar is the optimization of the cargo optimization. You can imagine that in Europe, the most transported commodity is air. So we have a large possibility of optimization. Third pillar is the decarbonization of the fleet. We act in that framework, applying different technologies, actually also looking at our long-term vision. We don't think that we will have just one technology, such as, I don't know, the electric, hydrogen, or whatever. We think that the best option is to move towards different technologies, which are based on, in general, the decarbonization, such as biofuels, for instance. We have a large amount of biofuels used in the fleet at the moment. We have 80 biodiesel trucks. We are in a deployment phase of bio-LNG. We have around 100 LNG trucks running at the moment. Bio-LNG is not so common, but we strongly believe that moving towards bio-LNG, we can have a great results. Also looking at the well-to-wheel perspective, so not just the consumption phase of the fuel, but the whole, I would say, chain from the production and the usability of the fuel. And obviously, we are already moving towards electric and hydrogen. We have recently approved a plan for the deployment of 50 electric trucks in Europe in general. We started from Italy, but we can say that the most important deployment of trucks will be in Germany, since Germany is basically providing a lot of support for the deployment of electric trucks.
Mr. Condotta, how is EU policy influencing the plans and strategies of an international logistics group such as Gruber?
I would say that we are very aligned with the European policy cycle. Normally for policy cycle is intended the development of strategy of the European Commission that then goes on the planning, implementation, the monitoring of the implementation of the policies, and then a new policy cycle starts. The two trends that we follow in terms of policy framework are sustainability from one side and digitalization from the other side. We are active on specific associations at the European level that allows us to be, let's say, more aware about how the development of the different policies at European level are developing. The first one is ALICE, which is a European network funded in Brussels years ago. The positive aspect of that association is that you have in the same association universities, research centers, and manufacturers of vehicles, shippers, and then logistics companies. The second association that see us very involved is 2Zero. 2Zero is an association which has been created directly by the European Commission in cooperation with the automotive sector stakeholders, let's say. I have the pleasure to be vice chair of that association, representing all logistics companies and logistics users. That association is very vertical, so it's focused on promoting research and innovation in the field of electric and hydrogen vehicles, defining, let's say, the main important topic for the research that then will be funded directly by the European Commission. Well, Gruber Logistics is a quite relevant company since right now we have a turnover around 720 million euro. We have a relevant fleet, which is 850 vehicles and so on. But I think that joining the European policy cycle is not really related to how big you are. Because if we consider us compared to German companies which have, I don't know, 30 billion of turnover or whatever, we are in any case a small company. It's more on what you want to do. It's more on your willingness to innovate and to directly, let's say, approach a concept of open innovation.
Well, that's all, folks. We truly hope that such a deep and long debate may help you in making a better idea about how organizations and companies are dealing with such a complex and fast-moving scenario, with the shared target of making passenger and freight transportation more sustainable.
Just like EU standards, the overall transportation sector is evolving rapidly. Sustainable bus and sustainable truck and van provide updates and insights every day. So keep following us on our website, social media channels, weekly newsletter, and don't miss our upcoming events. We want to remind you that this web event will be available on our YouTube accounts and also on our website. Thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.